you want me to do it in French? Because I can do the whole thing in French.
It's like the worst episode of Long Lost Family you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
You're quite good at this, David. So, like, do you feel you're getting I'm actually I'm getting a wee bit of a expert interviewer.
I really enjoy it.
What you want to book for radio are good talkers, people who can talk, people who are relaxed.
Yeah. Diane, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, and what an intro.
Oh, that's all right, we try. It's all true, and it's all true. I haven't made any of that up. I can make a bit up if you want me to.
Where would I start? I love the way you said one or two things have been happening in the last year. I mean, it's been an absolute roller coaster.
I was doing so many technology stories, they decided to call me technology correspondent.
I am surrounded by Lego mechs, among other things, because my husband is in a meeting downstairs, and I think that he's decided his meeting is more important.
You with this guy in Greece, and he was Greek?
No, so he was actually Welsh.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought, well, if I write a book, then more people will hear about me and I'll be invited kindly on podcasts like this.
Like most of us in business, we face challenges. We face situations that might not have been expected, and we have to adapt. We have to react. We have to overcome. Otherwise, we could find our business no longer being in existence. My guest in this particular podcast is Karl Pemberton, and Karl harbored a dream to fly jets for the RAF, or perhaps to be a policeman on traffic control. He's neither of those things now, and I think the world of business, and finance in particular, is all the better for it. Not to say he hasn't tried to mirror a couple of the Tom Cruise roles. He has, quite successfully. So this man is great value. He's going to be sharing for you his wonderful story, his taking over of a family business and shaping it in a way that created something quite different in a rather staid and professional and traditional sector. He's brought innovation. He's brought a strong belief in the way things should be done. And as a result of that, recruited in the same vein. It's been successful. Enough of that, enough of sock drawers, of Jerry Maguire, of his Top Gun call sign, which I'll leave you to discover a little later on. And we will enjoy this time I spent with Karl Pemberton. I'm delighted to welcome to the Insight podcast with HReSource a gentleman that I've known for a number of years. And actually, I'm delighted to say that today actually coincides with him hitting into a league table of one of the most influential individuals in the region. I am delighted and honoured and hope he doesn't just put his fee up for that case. Karl Pemberton, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, David.
Delighted to see you, sir. Today, this series is all about professionals. Karl is somebody who has been running his own business now for quite a number of years. I think we must be getting on for about 15 years or so.
Yeah, literally a couple of weeks back, 15 years.
Yeah, so there's a lot of experience there, and his journey and the way in which he's been self-effacing and self-aware enough to know that he needs to look at personal development and how he's grown and how he's helped to grow the business as a result of that. Wonderful story that I'm sure a lot of our regular listeners and watchers are going to be tuning into. So, Karl, I want to start off with that early version of Karl Pemberton who was at school. I mean, what was the schoolboy Karl Pemberton like? Any early signs of entrepreneurial flair?
Not really. I was probably somebody who just did enough to get by. I don't know if that's a typical teenage boy.
That sounds like me.
I would never have classed myself, well, I probably still don't. I've never classed myself as necessarily that academic person. I wasn't a high achiever at school. I was probably a bit of a I want to say the class clown, but that's not really, that probably will go against me if I say that. I don't know. For me, school was more around enjoying myself and
the social experience.
Yeah, and having a laugh with, ultimately the people I went to school with. I think the teachers liked me. I wasn't a trouble causer, but I was not I wasn't a teacher's pet either. So I probably just blended into being just a normal type of person in the middle of the road.
The sort of guy that was never short of having mates, and you were part of the crowd, part of the in crowd, maybe. I'd
probably say the only thing, to be fair, the only thing school-wise that I would say is probably still with me now. I was probably a bit of a social chameleon.
Right.
Happy in any sort of environment. I didn't necessarily have a set of friends who were one type of friend, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And is there any early indications that there were dreams of following a particular path that maybe you ultimately didn't realize, but you were setting your seams on something outside of school, or was it too soon for that?
Yeah, I think, well, I've always been a confident person, and sometimes confidence when you're young doesn't come across in the best of ways, does it? So I would say I've always had that confidence and that belief in my ability. And believe it or not, as I've spoken about quite a few times, when I was at school and at college, my ultimate desire was to be in the RAF as a pilot, or to be in the police as a traffic cop. Completely random, but that was my passion. I sort of had this dream that I'd be this Top Gun type of
Top Gun or Chips.
Yeah, exactly. Some Teesside version of that. And I actually applied to the RAF, to be fair, and I got through the first few phases of that. And Yorkshire Bank actually offered me a job, which was sort of 4 or 5 miles away. And I hate to say it, but I took the easy option.
We make these choices. You know. I think I remember very, very early on in my career, I had an opportunity to change jobs at Thomas Cook, where I'd left home in Gloucester to go to Peterborough, what seemed like many, many miles away. And the job that I went for was a job that would take me back to Gloucester with a company car. I was like, yeah, let's go for that. I didn't get the job, but you know, things happen in your career, don't they? And you know, for a reason. And obviously, you found yourself working in the banking industry because you were good with numbers, because you had an affinity with.
Yeah, I was always good at maths. I would say if there was a subject I was strong at, it would have been maths. I did maths at A level. And to be fair, that summer when I left college, I went through the Yellow Pages, which any young'uns watching this probably won't know what it was, but it was a big Bible of numbers.
It was the Bible.
I went through the Yellow Pages and sent my CV off to every bank, building society, estate agent. I think that's probably about it. And I did that more as a backup in case I didn't get in the RAF.
And then they were the first ones to come up with an offer.
Yeah, Yorkshire Bank, Gresham branch at the top of Linthorpe Road in Middlesbrough. They wrote back and they said they had a vacancy to put somebody on what they call the management development program, which appealed to me. I'm not the most patient of people, so any sort of role that offered progression, you know, was really good. I ultimately took the gamble that I didn't want to go to university. And the gamble I had at the time, or the mindset I had at the time, was that I believed that within 3 years of me doing a job, I could work my way to a level that somebody coming in with a graduate with a degree would have got to. And ultimately that would stand me in better stead moving forward, because I'd have 3 years of experience and ultimately money behind me, rather than 3 years worth of debt.
Yeah, I remember it's exactly the same when I was at Thomas Cook, moving through the ranks, starting off at a very low level and working my way up. And the frustration I used to get when they used to have their graduate programs, and then the graduates would fly in at a level above you, think, but I've been here all this time, I've got this experience. But anyway, you get that in larger organizations, don't you? You get a decision from on high about, you know, well, we need to recruit somebody in to bring in fresh blood. And I think he knows that. I mean, Thomas Cook was a good organization, don't get me wrong. Certainly when I was there, it was making money. But in Yorkshire Bank, I guess there was also a view for bringing on local talent and for bringing people along. Did you find their training programs and development programs helpful?
They were brilliant. They were absolutely brilliant. And I do think it's a shame, actually, that our industry doesn't have that opportunity anymore. My generation, I'm sounding old here, but my generation that joined the banks in the probably even those who joined in the early 90s, through the 90s into the early 2000s, the banks were absolutely brilliant at spending money on training people. It was almost a no expense spared. People were on training courses week in, week out. And ultimately, they were teaching you some really, really good traits. And it molded who I became. And there is ultimately a reason why lots of, I say but our former bank colleagues now work with us here at Active, because they trained us in a certain way, which you don't really find in today's world. And it's such a shame, because the banks, they don't exist as they used to, without being all too nostalgic about it. But you know, there's a generation that I'm grateful that I was part of, that you know, I would say has a skill set that is you know, in quite high demand.
There's certain things, and again, I can probably trump you in terms of old fartiness, but I would say that there are certain things that I learned. And Thomas Cook was owned by Midland Bank at the time that I was there, but that's ancient history. But there was a similar approach to training and development, and the way the managers were with the staff, in the most part as well, was very careful in terms of bringing them on and keeping them to. There's certain things in muscle memory, and I'll give you one example of not going into a meeting without an agenda, which, you know, I'm always staggered when I turn up somewhere if I didn't have much prior notice. When I go to a meeting and then realize that nobody's working to an agenda, it's a bit of a free for all, and that just wastes an awful lot of people's times, because you haven't got the structure, you haven't got the, and maybe that just appeals to my psyche. I don't know about structure and being organized, but yeah, things like that build a muscle memory when you're in business. Then to say, well, actually, this is the way you do it, and it's a very, very solid base to work from.
Yeah. It's like I say, it's such a shame that training doesn't really exist now, because there are so many people, certainly in Teesside, even across the northeast and the north of England, that I'm still very close to and still in touch with, which, you know, we do stick together, and we've all been very successful really in whatever we've gone on to do. And I firmly believe it's because of the grounding we were all given.
So what was the jobs? What jobs? I'm sure you had more than one job. What was the sort of progression within the bank?
Yeah, like many, you start off on the counter, on the tills, seeing the clients that come through the door, which is very, well, it gives you that broad acceptance of society. You know, there's all walks of life out there. And when you sit on the counter of a bank, you've got all walks of life that walk through the door and ultimately want to pay money and or take money out. So again, you get a good broad spectrum of what's actually out there. There were all sorts of jobs going within the branches back in those days. You know, a lot of people might not realize, but all of the checks were manually coded through a coding machine. And it was a laborious, horrible job if you were allocated that. Yeah. There was balancing the whole bank in terms of till reserve and things like that. You were literally the key holder to the safe. You were stacking the mini banks full of, you know, £250,000 in brand new cash on a bank holiday weekend, as an example. And it was, you know, it was very, very diverse. You then move up the ranks through helping people with personal loans, debt structuring, and ultimately I ended up in the position working in a fairly new department that started in '99, which was called executive banking. It then became premium banking and then private banking, and ultimately it was looking after higher net worth clients and giving that personal service, for which I became a manager in, I think it was around 2002, when I became a private banking manager, which I was relatively young at the time to be doing that.
Only what, mid-20s at that stage? That's doing,
yeah, about 25, yeah. All of my peers who I was working with were were, I daren't say much older because some of them might watch this, but they were certainly older than me. But it was brilliant because I was learning off people who'd been there longer than I was and were doing a brilliant job. So again, as somebody who was learning my trade, it was phenomenal. And you got to meet a lot of great people, again, some of which I'm still in touch with now. And
was this still with Yorkshire Bank, or because I know
still Yorkshire Bank? Yeah.
Yeah, you moved to another bank, but I'm not sure where there was an incident that happened within the family that sort of caused a unexpected item in the family business area.
Yeah, so my dad became seriously ill in 2004. He ended up on life support for 3 months, and ultimately it nearly sent the business down because the business was my dad, really. Right. And I think a lot of small high street general practitioner businesses do revolve around the business owner.
Yeah.
Now, I was about to move to RBS at that point to do more of the investment banking side of things. And, thankfully, my dad made a recovery. He came back to work. But after a few years, it was quite clear that he couldn't do it on his own.
Yeah.
And my dad's always asked me if I would ever get involved, but, I was learning in an environment where I wanted to suck up as much of that knowledge as I could.
You were on a trajectory then, weren't you?
Yeah. And, there was always something in the back of my mind, which I was teased about at school and teased about at college was, oh, what's the point of you doing really well because you're just going to go and work for your dad? And I think that's one of the reasons that always pushed me away from the family business to start with. And the RAF, if I'd have gone in the RAF, I probably would have never made that step over potentially. But a twist of fate that the bank offered me the first job meant I stayed in financial services. I learned a lot of skills. Ultimately, that was beneficial. So in 2007, I took the plunge after a couple of years with RBS and moved over to Active with a clear view that I wanted to develop it because I saw a massive opportunity between the polar extremes of the banking world, which is very corporate, but it's very focused on brand, process, procedure, training, and such like. And obviously it was great at attracting clients at that higher end. You then had a family business which was very independent, very moral focused, very put an arm around a client and look after them. And there were polar extremes and they didn't really match, but without necessarily, it was not rocket science, but you take the best approach at this end, you take the best approach at that end. Yeah. And there's a massive gap in the middle that actually said, if we became a well-structured, well-trained, respected brand that became known for doing the right thing, which is that family moral side coming through and the independent side tailored in with bringing some process, procedure, some training, some brand and some structure around it. Well, you should be in a position then to attract some great clients and great staff from that high end, but you should also be able to blow out of the water those smaller independent providers who just can't compete at that higher end. So it was no more rocket science than trying to develop that, very much as you've done and been involved in the past. There was nobody within financial services world that almost replicated that law firm practice, that accountancy practice that we see in every major town and city, around the country. You had polar extremes. You didn't have those good, solid regional operations, which ultimately we wanted to become, and ultimately it's where we are today.
The timeline with your move, if my memory serves me, and of course we have senior moments occasionally, but 2007 was round about an interesting period for financial institutions, or thereabouts, because I think the very next year the skids appeared. We just came off the rails somewhat, thanks to subprime and Northern Rock and.
Yeah, and I clearly, I would never say that I could see the writing on the walls because I couldn't. I'll admit there were times working in the bank where it didn't feel comfortable, some of the things you were being asked to do. And ultimately, it was my reputation that was on the line. So it felt right to leave in 2007. And I was 30 at that time. So I was still potentially, well, certainly in my eyes now, I was still young.
Teenager.
Yeah. And, you know, I didn't want my reputation to be tarnished by the things the banks were doing. Now, you could say again, it was good luck, good timing, and such like, but you know, as we'll come on to probably later on, I am a big believer now that sometimes you make your own luck.
Yeah, absolutely.
And fate intervenes. I'm a big believer in fate. Everything happens for a reason. And I don't know, maybe that was just the right call at the right time. It felt like the right thing to do.
So it's probably an unfair question to ask you, given the context of what was happening or what was around the corner. So maybe more generally, how was your expectation with business ownership and business management compared to reality? You know, you would have gone into this thinking one thing, but probably very quickly realized that actually there was a little bit more to this than met the eye. And did you find that, or did it all come very easily?
How do I answer that? I think it's a bit too, I think I'd probably segment it even more, to be fair, David, in the fact that I think the transition to making that move to active from the bank was, I'll say it was relatively easy.
Yeah.
But that probably comes back to, I've always been confident, and I'm always, as you've said before, I've always been a glass half full type person, rather than anything else. I think the different dimensions you can add to that was obviously the financial crash in 08 or 09 suddenly then made you realize, blimey, this isn't going to be a straight line journey.
Yeah.
And we have to put a lot of legwork into to make this work. It made you realize things then weren't secure as they were before. And as my business partner Paul and I openly tell everybody, I remember going certainly 3, if not 6 months where we didn't take a wage out of the business, purely because we wanted to keep everybody employed.
Yeah.
And we didn't want anybody who we'd recently taken on to suddenly be worried and think the business wasn't sound by us having to get rid of anybody or to reduce their wages. Yeah. So we bit the bullet and didn't take a wage personally for 3 to 6 months, more to gloss over and make sure that the wider team didn't think, you know, or didn't worry and didn't realize how, you know, challenging things were. So that adds a different dimension. And then the other dimension that I would add is, I think running a business can be easy if you want it to be easy. And what I mean by that is, if you just want to run a lifestyle business that plods on, so this time next year, you're going to be doing the same as you did this year, and 5 years down the line, you're just going to be doing the same thing. And you want to do it more just as a, like I say, to supplement a lifestyle, and you don't have necessarily desires to improve, grow, or be better, then I think it would be relatively easy. However, that's not me and that's not us. So when you add that dimension of always thinking of new ideas, taking that weight on your shoulder, because it's not just you that's affected by it, it's your entire team. If your ideas are wrong and you get those decisions wrong, they affect everybody. That weight on your shoulders, that expectation from your team to be coming up with new ideas, that's where the burden, I think, sometimes you know, can overwhelm you. But then that's down to us as individuals, isn't it, as to whether that's what our goals and our desires are.
And you mentioned Paul, who joined you in the business, Paul Gibson. He's quite important in the journey of Active as an organization. I know you've mentioned him several times, and I've met him, and he's a fabulous guy. And as far as he was an example of, was he one of your first hires? Did he do it like a mutual sort of conversation, or did that set the tone for your future recruitment? Yeah,
Paul and I had known each other throughout our time in the Yorkshire Bank. We played for Yorkshire Bank Sunday League football team together. I worked alongside his wife, and we were close outside of work. And two sides to that is, if we'd have left on the same day, the bank would have absolutely tried to destroy us, which, to be fair, they did try and do anyway, but that's another story. But also the business as it was under my dad probably couldn't, well, it wouldn't have been able to afford us both at the same time, because again, the banks were quite generous in their pay structures and their reward structures. So we decided to come at different times. I made the leap first in mid '07, and then Paul joined about 18 months later in Jan '09, after we'd already made a bit of headway, and we were already sufficient to be able to afford Paul's wages, because he's more expensive than I was.
Let's say that publicly now. We'll have that in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
And does that really, I mean, one of the things that successful entrepreneurs often refer to is the team around them and the people that they build. And sometimes you think, well, that's just words. But I've seen on more than one occasion evidence of how Active have built a team around them. And I think quite often what is a good sign, and it can't always be definitive, but a good sign of good recruitment is your average tenure in terms of how long people stay and how they grow and they develop within a business. I'm not jumping here, am I, Karl? That's very much true of Active in terms of the staff that you've got, the core of staff you've got.
Yeah, very much so. Even like you say, going back to my very first day, I knew where I wanted the business to grow to. Paul knew where he wanted the business to grow to. I think the first realization we should all make is we should all know our limitations and know what we're good at. I think the biggest mistake a lot of people make is try and be all things to all people and try and wear all hats. To be fair, that's what my dad used to do. But then ultimately, when my dad was poorly, there was no business because he used to wear all of those hats. Unfortunately, it's probably generational. I knew to achieve what we wanted to achieve as a business, I couldn't do it without Paul, because I know what I'm good at. And in a nice way, Paul complements and fills the gaps that I'm not so strong at, because that's the areas that he's absolutely brilliant at. So, together, we've always bounced off each other really, really well. We've got double the amount of ideas, and we're both very capable at the things that I think we're both pretty good at. Moving that forward, we've always had the mentality in the business that we should always recruit people who've got skills, either skills in terms of knowledge and gaps in knowledge and expertise, but we should never be frightened of recruiting people who are better than us. And again, I think it's a failure a lot of people make. For me personally, I know I'm not the world's greatest financial advisor, but I would back that off in the other side by saying I don't need to be the world's greatest financial advisor. My job as MD of this company is to run a bloody good business and try and recruit or train and develop the world's best financial advisors, because ultimately I don't need to be the best. Like I say, I don't need to be doing all of the financial advice, because ultimately my focus is to run the company.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like you're on the pitch all the time, playing all of those roles. That's not what it's about. It's very much a facilitator, a grower. And one of the we talked about just before we pressed record on this in the green room chat about a recent life event that put things into sharp relief for you. That was November 21. This has now been recorded in 22, so that was less than 18 months ago. Just want to tell us a little bit about that and how that actually sort of almost in a very sort of dramatic way proves your point about having good people around you.
Yeah, I think, take yourself back 12 months, this time last year, June 21. If you'd have asked me, how's everything going? I would have openly admitted, although I never really say, because I think it sounds like bragging at times, but looking back, if you'd have said, how's things going? I would have said everything was absolutely brilliant. Everything was great. The business was in a brilliant position. The team were happy. We're growing. We're profitable. Everything was rosy, let's say, in the garden. Was I busy? Hell yeah. Was I stressed? No, I wouldn't have said stressed, but I was ridiculously busy, but I loved that. I used to thrive off that. But I found myself sort of after the summer, I started finding myself running out of gas quite quickly, and sort of suffering quite bad headaches. And ultimately they progressed and developed into being admitted into hospital in November with the suspected stroke, or suspected bleed on the brain. There's basically me being a typical guy. I didn't go to the doctors for quite a while, because I just thought I'd be okay. And we're probably all guilty of that until my better half
as charged.
111.
Yeah.
And ultimately 111 put me through to 999 and said, you need an ambulance, you need to go into North Tees, which is quite scary because you keep trying to fob it off, don't you? You just think, oh, it's just a headache, take some tablets, I'll be all right. And obviously things change from there really. To then be told, you know, you need to stop, you physically need to stop doing what you're doing, you need to rest. I won't go through the ins and outs of what went on, but it was back and forth for about 6 weeks, which was really, really frustrating. And ultimately, I ended up with this, what is known as a tear, or what is a tear to the back of the brain. But because it went on for so long, not only me not ringing the doctors, but also them not being able to resolve or find out what was going on, they'll never know whether it was a stroke or a bleed, or you know, it could be something else. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, so I've had plenty of people say to me it's the jab, but I'm not going to go down that route because you'll tear yourself up in knots. But yeah, it ultimately forced me to stop. I had to recover. It's not something I've ever really had to do before. I enjoy being busy. I enjoy running around and helping other people. And ultimately, when you feel quite useless, if that's probably the bluntest word, you feel, you know, you're sat at home, not capable of doing much. It's not a nice place to be.
I mean, that's evidence for the fact you're stood up giving this today, which is making me feel very lazy. You're a very active guy. I mean, you really are a very active guy. You work for a number of charities. You're always out and about. You're always doing things. You are very supportive of others. And I can just imagine the frustration. I can just imagine the pent-up, but also the frustration of the frustration, as much as because of the nature of what it is, you can't get too stressed. So. No,
and again, it's probably a failure or a fault of my own, really, just in view of how life's been and how I've pushed myself. Is I'm quite black and white. If the doctors would have said, this is what's wrong, this is how long you're going to be out of action for, this is when you can go back and everything's going to be fine, I could have settled. I could have settled at home knowing that there was a plan, or there was there was key points to aim for. I think the not knowing what was wrong, not knowing how long I was going to feel like that, not knowing when I could go back to work, not knowing, could I go for a run? Could I walk the dog? Am I allowed to go out for a coffee? What am I allowed to do? If that unknown, then that really does, in a very blunt sort of way, it messes with your head, because you can't see a way out of it.
Yeah, very frustrating. I mean, in terms of the effect on the others around you as well. I mean, you've got a relatively young family. I think you've got a daughter that's, she's school age now. She's primary school.
She's coming up 7.
Yeah. So and older sons.
Yep.
So they're quite demanding, as in wanting dad's attention and doing very active things. So that must have been frustrating as well. Yeah.
Again, I remember. Sounds horrible, but on the medication that was on. But on I remember Christmas Eve just being slumped on the sofa, not really capable of moving, bit like a zombie. I have crude analogies, but it was like coming back from the pub after chasing 6 pints down after we just going back to my Sunday league days. You feel you're in the room, you're sort of aware of what's going on, but you can't really participate. And I remember Christmas Eve, and the little one was running around and obviously ridiculously excited for obvious reasons. And I was just laid on the sofa thinking, I can't move. I can't really get involved. And it's just not nice. It's not nice to feel, like you say, useless. And unable to partake in your kid's life when, you know, it's those simple things like that should be.
Recovery, haven't you?
I'm probably just wearing a good smile, to be fair. I don't know. I've done as I'm told. That's probably, you know, a key to this. I have took it easy. I have tried not to get involved with as many things over this last 6 months, and yeah, slow and steady. And I've just got to accept I probably can't run at the pace I used to for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, there's a meme that's following around at the moment. It's a sound, what do you call it? Basically, it's a soundbite meme or a soundtrack meme of we used to be young and carefree, but now look at, and we're going around taking pictures of vegetables. I didn't happen to have a life event for that to happen. That's just happened. That's age, you know. So there's the underlying thing as well is we all ultimately, you know, if we're fortunate enough, we get older. And I think for a certain personality, and I think I can see correlations with the way my mindset is as well. You do think you're bulletproof. You do think that, you know, you can just push through all of these things that happen and you're never ever going to slow up. And then when your body tells you that actually that isn't going to happen, it's just incredibly frustrating. And the best thing you could do is just literally listen to your body, which when I did my very last Great North Run, it was when I didn't listen to my body, and that's why I can never do another Great North Run. So that was a life lesson, and hopefully one I've passed on to my kids. Don't be as stupid as your dad. But back to the case in point with your story, you've also got a very interesting connection with Tom Cruise, other than Top Gun.
Okay.
And being somebody who can obviously create sort of take on a mission, and what might seem impossible, you can achieve it. But also Jerry Maguire.
Go on. I thought you were actually going to criticize my height, actually, to be fair.
No.
In terms of that, I thought that was the connection to Tom Cruise there, because I'm not the biggest, am I?
Oh, do that? I'm shorter. But Jerry Maguire, show me the money. At one stage, you took on the agents of the sports agents of the world.
Oh, yeah.
You were the ethical, moral, straight talking and honest sports agent. How did you fit in?
I was talking about this to someone a couple of weeks back, actually, because they didn't understand how we got involved. And again, it goes back to the banking days. The banks ultimately taught us to always do the right thing. I was fortunate in my latter years in the banks to look after people in that sector, whether they were players, coaches, club owners, etc. And they loved the honesty. They loved the fact that I would always do ultimately what was right for them. It wasn't what was right for the bank or right for me. And that trust and those bonds developed, really. That followed through to when I started with Active. A lot of those clients followed, more because they said, I trust you. It's you that I trust, not necessarily the bank, which you don't really put a price on that or value that until somebody says it to you. So it was really, really humbling. Now, that industry is clearly littered with people who are trying to exploit players, trying to, tag on and get a piece of their earnings, because ultimately they are very fortunate and they tend to earn good money. Now, we got involved because some of the clients we looked after were being ripped off, is probably the fairest way of saying it. Their agents weren't doing what was right for them. And quite a lot of them said, well, I'd use you if I could, but we can't because you're not an agent. So right. Paul and I made the decision, I think it was in 2011, to form an agency more around protecting the needs of the existing clients that we already had. It wasn't there to go out and look for more, but ultimately we got a reputation for doing the right thing and referrals, and you get introduced to other people. And it's probably fair to say that it's ruthless. Everybody's always trying to get one over the next person. And the longer I was involved, and we got players who were Premier League players, international players. We got lots of players there, Premier League and international debuts. And it was, don't get me wrong, I got to experience some brilliant life events because of it. But you also realize that the hawks were always circling to try and pinch your clients, or always trying to undermine what you were saying. And, somebody else would come in and promise the earth. And we knew it wasn't sustainable, but unfortunately, sometimes people in that industry, they've all got goals and desires, and ultimately they go with who's promising them the most, which...
You're dealing with people who've got a very short career and an opportunity and a window to maximize their return, never knowing whether they're going to have the next game and end up with a catastrophic injury. So they've always got this tension, I guess. I mean, it's I'm just remembering the film. It's Jerry Maguire, isn't it? It's Cuba Gooding Jr. and Tom Cruise. It's about, who's got the best deal for me.
But it became quite evident, like you say, in the latter years. I think it was 2018 when we stopped. 2018 when we stopped. It became quite evident that the demands to do that with players at such a high level was ridiculously high. For me to compete and make an impact at that level, I had to either drop the moral card and be like everybody else in that industry, which don't want to do that. I either had to admit that we were going to get walked all over, and therefore we probably weren't going to make a difference, and therefore you think, what's the point, because it takes up a lot of your time. Or you have to hold your hands up and think, ultimately, either of the first two put at risk the reputation of the financial side of the business, which is the bread and butter. And I didn't want to fall into the camp of being that ruthless, immoral agent to try and compete, because that would have had a negative impact upon the main business, which again ultimately affects the lives of 20 odd people who work here.
It's really quite a sad indictment of the industry, isn't it?
And look, I enjoyed what I did. I did the right thing whilst I was involved. I tried to make a difference. I did for what involvement I had, but it's never going to change unless that change comes from the top. And I'm happy to now be a fan of football again, rather than doing it for work. And I'm happy to be able to criticize those at the top, not in this country, but we all probably know which countries they're based in. They need to change from the top for it to actually have an impact further down, so that the players and the likes of me who wanted to try and make a difference can actually do so.
Well, back to the day job. You were involved in the Goldman Sachs 10,000, which I've got a little note here because I can't remember all these words together, but it's apparently it's the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business UK program designed to provide high quality practical education and business support to leaders of high growth small businesses and social enterprises across the country. Did the program deliver for you?
Definitely. So I was encouraged to actually go on the program by our non-exec director, which was Gary Lumby, who again has been instrumental for our business. And again, you asked before about, did I have natural business acumen or entrepreneurial spirit? I probably had the spirit, but there was nothing robust behind it to demonstrate whether it worked or not. And I would say we were fortunate, lucky, or it certainly worked in those first 4 or 5 years before going on the Goldman Sachs program, which I did in 2013. But when you go on such a structured program written by ultimately a company that is ridiculously successful, it makes you realize what you don't know. And when we started then to put into practice some of the learnings from that course, that ultimately expedited Active's growth to get onto the trajectory that we're obviously now seeing and benefiting from today. Because we all know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know, to put it simply. And if you've got a very closed mindset, thinking I know what I'm doing, nobody can tell me how to do my job any better, I would challenge that and say you're probably going backwards, because the one thing that I will always admit to being is a bit like a sponge, and I've always had an open mind.
Yeah.
And if someone can tell me a way of doing it better, if I can learn from my peers on how to do something better, all businesses are technically the same. We all have the same challenges. It's just the widget we're selling at the end that makes each business different. We're all selling something, a service, a product, whatever that may be. So if you understand the fundamental principles of how to run a business, then you will, it'll open up massive opportunities and windows for you, which if you're prepared to learn and you're prepared to hear some harsh home truths, then, the future can be much brighter and far more prosperous. And
it's partly a brave thing to do, because some people natural inclination of people is not to be exposed for what you don't know. But ultimately, how do you grow? How do you learn? How do you accept things if you're not self-aware enough to know that there are gaps in the?
And a lot of people don't like being criticised either and told that they're doing it wrong. Yeah. There is that protection of, this is my baby, this is my business, I know what I'm doing. What do you know about financial services? There's that natural resistance. And to be fair, that's very, very strong in financial services. And it's why I think a lot of people in our peer group don't necessarily grow as we have. I do think that's a big reason why we've booked the trend and we've grown to where we are. It's because we are open-minded to doing things differently. And if somebody teaches us something, we'll give it a go and we'll try it. We're not scared to do that. I'd rather try and fail than never try at all and just keep doing what we've always done for the last 10, 20 years, which happens quite a lot, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You've also got moving forward to the position you're in with the Institute of Directors now, where I think there are three main pillars: connect, develop, influence. And I would say you've been able to develop, and you are influencing very much on behalf of the Institute, because you're now the chair of the regional section of the Institute, interestingly termed South Northeast.
The other way, Northeast South.
Northeast South. Okay, there you go.
I still don't understand how they came up with that, but obviously it was somebody in London, wasn't it?
But you're in a position there where we've got Newcastle, which everyone knows Newcastle, and there's the Tomb, and you've got Leeds, and we've got a bit of an identity crisis, because you and I are in the same patch, which is Teesside, which is Cleveland, which is it Stockton, is it Redcar, is it Hartlepool, is it Middlesbrough, is it Tees Valley? What do you call this spot of land? And we do have a bit of an identity crisis. So anything that can help us to put our name on the map is a good thing.
Yeah, and again, it's typical London decision makers, isn't it? And no disrespect to my to my leaders in the IOD in London, but when a message comes out from London, they see the North as Leeds, or certainly the Northeast as Newcastle, and Yorkshire as Leeds, and nothing exists in between. And unfortunately, because of that message, the IOD was missing a significant opportunity to support people in the business community in this area. I'm passionate about this area. I love this area. I'm fortunate that most of my career has been based here. I've certainly always lived here, and a lot of the people I've learned from are based here. So if I can give back to this area and encourage other people to put down roots here, grow their business here, and prove that it's a prosperous place to be, then again, I feel as though morally I'm doing the right thing and giving to that next generation, in terms of encouraging other people to be open to ideas, and hopefully they can learn as I've learned, so their businesses can keep prospering. Because if we all do well, we all get to benefit.
Absolutely. So speaks number 5 in the top most influential people in the region. Well, I don't know why you weren't number 1, but we're obviously going to work on that one. On looking at the day job, very much the day job, and looking at a lot of business owners now who are facing difficult times. I keep hearing the news about full employment. I keep hearing about the government talking about how the economy is doing great. Well, actually, you look at the last couple of months, it's not doing so great. I do wonder about the underlying mood within the business community, and I can't believe it's great right now. What advice is putting you on the spot? What advice, what direction might you give for a business owner who is now concerned about either where they go with their exit strategy, with their retirement planning? What should they be thinking about? What should they be doing?
Yeah, I think, well, again, I think there's a few different messages, really. We as a business, we actually survey business owners in Teesside, and the mass majority are actually extremely positive about the outlook of their own business. They're extremely positive about the outlook of Teesside. They are less positive about the outlook of the UK economy. And, you know, I think we do operate in a little bit of a bubble here in Teesside that, on the face of it, things are going quite well. So fingers crossed that that positivity can continue, because I do believe a lot of this, the traction and you know, sense of direction does come through optimism and belief that things are going to be better. The reality, obviously, is the you know, the economic statistics don't fare well nationally. I think there is a good chance that we are unfortunately going to head towards a recession, and you know, that is going to be tough, and it's going to hit obviously a lot of people harder than others. Going back to basics of what you've said before, and certainly what I've said before, I think as a business, if you have a good, well thought through plan with you know, lots of ideas and ways of how you can trade through a recession or challenging times, and you are open to those new ideas, and going back to what I said, as long as you are open-minded to be able to navigate these challenges as they come along, I'd like to think that a lot of people will be okay. We saw it in COVID, didn't we? I think a lot of the businesses that probably struggled the most were the ones who probably didn't have a plan. They didn't have a robust plan of what would they do in this situation, risk assessments and biggest risks to their business. They didn't have new ideas. They just tried to carry on doing what they've always done, and ultimately they're the ones who struggled the most. And you do see a big difference between those type of businesses sort of during and post COVID. So I would encourage anybody, if this is on the horizon, spend time navigating and looking at what opportunities there are for your business. How can you circumvent them? How can you avoid them where at all possible? Don't take loads of money out of your company and run it as a lifestyle business so there's nothing left and no skin in the game to see you through these challenging times, because we're always going to have them. As you've said, you know, we've been in business a long time. Bad times are always going to come along. We never really know when. They do tend to average every 10 years. So you could argue we are due one. Yeah. There's a lot of people in this world who've never ran a business during a bad time. So if you've never been through one before, be prepared. And I actually think it's a good test of a business, because if you do run a genuinely good operation, you will come out of it. You will learn a lot about yourself, your staff, your business, your clients, and you probably will come out of it stronger. I know for a fact the 2009 crash, although it didn't feel like it at the time, that 2009 crash, looking back, was one of the best things ever to happen to Active. I do know, again, with hindsight now, looking back, COVID has been brilliant for Active. And what I mean about that is it gets you to look long and hard at yourself, your processes, your structures, your people, who's in it for the long run, who's actually prepared to graft and get you through this, who's just in it for the money, and who's not going to help you through it. You know,
you spot the passengers.
Yeah, and you know, you learn a lot about yourself, and dare I say it, those two events, they actually got rid of a lot of our competition. So when I say they've been brilliant for Active, I'm not saying that in a big-headed sort of way. I'm saying it in terms of, it sort of sorted out the wheat from the chaff, and a lot of our competitors disappeared during both of those periods, and we ultimately benefited off the back of it because we had a good, robust business model. We still kept singing the same tune, we still kept beating the drum, we were still there servicing our clients. We didn't run and hide, we didn't disappear. You know, we did what we said we were going to do, and that's massively important in challenging times.
And I think, referencing one of the points you made with regards to your father in the business, and about, at the time, the business was all about him. Obviously, having a business where there are any number of people that are capable of having made the right recruitment decisions, the management team is robust, you've got good external and internal drivers within the business. So therefore, you're in a good spot, but you've still got to be able to flex when you need to. You've still got to be able to adapt to the circumstances you're around. And that's down to leadership, and that's down to the way the business is being run. And as evidenced by what I see of Active, that is how you do operate. But you never know what's around the corner. So, you know, and it's this mindset you talked about brilliantly, with regards to you know, going on these development programs. Every day is a school day. You know, I try, although I look far from being the school kid that I was, I like to have the innocence sometimes of when we talk about digital marketing or whatever the new thing, shiny social media platform might be. I'll try it out. I'll give it a try. You know, I've got a semi-viral TikTok. So those sort of things you do because you need to understand it. Because if you don't, you very, very quickly find yourself falling away and falling behind. So staying curious, I think, is definitely right up there. Just very quickly, because I know we're taking a good chunk of your time today, Karl. What would you say is probably the best, or maybe you can think of the worst piece of business advice that you have been ever given? What would you say that would be?
I'll go with the best to start with. And these are probably things that, well, I do know these are the things that have stuck with me throughout my whole career. Is trust your gut. Because quite often, or more often than not, it is right.
100%.
And secondly, always do the right thing. If you can hold the mirror up in front of yourself and know you have done the right thing, or you've made a decision that ultimately is in the best interests of whoever is involved, no matter how hard that decision might be, if you're doing the right thing and making the right decision, again, I do think that will pay dividends in the long run. Although sometimes it seems a long time to pay back off, let's say.
Yeah.
So I'd certainly say they were the best things. The worst decision, the worst advice are people who chase turnover. Size is everything. You know, we've got no desire to be massive. We've got no desire to be big. We have got a desire to be better. Now, ultimately, if better means that you get bigger, then that's a consequence rather than necessarily the ultimate aim and direction. So certainly don't chase turnover. That's terrible. Again, my banking days, you see a lot of businesses that fold and go bust because of that, because it's not sustainable. They don't have the cash flow to do it. And again, this is probably something that's a second one that's been more relevant this last 12 months is, you do not have to be all things to all people and run around for 12 to 15 hours a day to make a difference. You can certainly do it in smaller, more bite-sized chunks. You don't have to be first in, last out to be a good leader and to prove a point. So, you know, you've got to look after yourself as well, rather than running yourself into the ground. And people who say, you've got to be first in, last out, and 12, 15-hour days. No. Well, I just think you then become a slave to the system, and you're just lining up your ticket for that early grave.
Exactly. And just a final point of that, always have a tidy sock drawer.
Yeah, I've got one of those. My wife would say that.
Self-confessed, I would say the reason for that comment, for those who don't know, self-confessed, I wouldn't say suffer, you have OCD.
Yeah, to a level. I'm not.
I too am known to have my quirks in terms of the way that I like things lined up. Not currently, because we're in the process of refurbishing our house. I don't quite have the wardrobe where I have the color-coded shirts, but if the possibility was there for me to be not using the rail that I've got at the moment, I would have pretty much my football team lined up in the wardrobe.
Do have that.
Yeah, it's about organisation as well, and the organisation we think. I think, what about your Top Gun, finally, your Top Gun call sign? What would it be?
God.
I know I'd put you on the spot with that one, so what about proactive?
Well, I think the only thing that springs to mind, to be fair, was back in my footballing days, I used to be known as the Cat.
Yeah.
Because I was the only one who was brave enough to dive on concrete, as I was told, because I used to play in goal, and I would just throw myself at anything. And I suppose that's probably true at any, anything in my life. I'm never frightened to have a go. So the Cat, probably throwing myself at anything, is probably about right, I think.
Karl the Cat.
Not that glamorous though, is it?
But you always land on your feet.
Fair point. Yeah, I didn't think of that.
Karl, it's been fantastic talking to you. I mean, this has been wonderful. I know we've had an hour of huge level of insights. Very much enjoyed it, and I'm sure the listeners are going to as well, and those tuning into the podcast. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, David. Much appreciated.